You can go through the pages of any worldview and any religion. I'll guarantee you something. You will never find what you will find in the pages of the Gospels. In every religious worldview, you pay. In Buddhism, you pay. In Hinduism, you pay. The whole cyclical world of karma. In Islam, you pay. You ask any devout Muslim, how do you hope to gain entrance into paradise? His answer will be very straightforward to you. I'm not making a caricature of this. This is legitimate, authentic Islamic doctrine, that your good deeds will have to outweigh your bad deeds. And when those good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, you make your entrance into paradise. And the metaphor of that paradise is in sensual terms. I know a man from Iraq who told me that when he walked to the mosque on Fridays, he would determine which mosque he went to based upon how miserable a week he'd had in his behavior. The worse he'd been through the week, he'd go to a farther away mosque and count the number of steps he was taking so that his good deeds would outweigh his bad deeds. I remember some years ago being asked to speak at the United Nations at their prayer breakfast, and they wanted me to speak on the search for absolutes in a relativistic age. It's tough at any hour of the day, leave alone early in the morning. And because of the nature of the setting, you're only given a handful of minutes, 18 to 20 minutes, and that's understandable. But what's even more daunting is that there's a plurality of worldviews out there. So you have to be very careful how you even approach the gospel. So my approach has always been take about 18 minutes to talk about something with which you'll find the common ground, and take the last 5 to 7 to bring the gospel into it. So I said, what absolutes are you looking for? What areas? You're looking for an absolute to define evil. You talk about evil empires here, which means you must have a definition for evil. You talk about justice. You have to be able to define what justice is and find an ontic point of reference for true justice. And you have left your families and your home and you love them, but in your heart you're tempted and you want to honor the dictates of love and the demands of love. You need an absolute. Evil, justice, love. And I said, sometimes you're going to blow it big time, and you're going to come to your mates to ask for pardon, forgiveness. What is the basis on which you even can be forgiven? Evil, justice, love, and forgiveness. I said, ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you this question? Do you know where in the world these four converged on a given day? It was on a hill called Calvary, when evil, justice, love, and forgiveness came together in that historic moment of the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, let me take you to an incredible conversation. You as counselors know this better. There are times when the headwinds are so strong in the situation you find yourself in, and desperately at that moment you're crying out to God for what? For wisdom. To take you beyond learning, to take you beyond understanding. You want the right word, you want to touch the right nerve, you want to bring healing. And so it is with us as evangelists or apologists who stand in front of hostile situations. I had one such that I'll never forget. It was just a few years ago. As a guest of the Archbishop of Canterbury, 5 of us were invited because of him to go and talk to the antagonists in Israel. We were dealing with the Israeli leaders and we were dealing with the Palestinian leaders, mainly the religious leaders. And on the last day, we were in the home of one of the 4 founders of Hamas. His name was Sheikh Talal. He had been in prison for 18 years, lost some of his children in suicide bombings, and the Archbishop led the talk, and the dialogue was going on. It was getting very intense. The room was full, and smoke just filling that room. After a big lunch, we had begun the discussion. Finally, the Archbishop looked at the others of us and said, can each one of you just ask one question, keep it brief, and let's see what his answer is to you. Because it was a private setting, I won't tell you the question I asked. I asked a question, and Sheikh Talal answered it. I said, Sheikh, I really don't like your answer. I said, you and I may never see each other again. I don't like your answer. I said, can I just say one thing to you, sir? And I hope you'll bear with me. I said, 5,000 years ago on a mountain not far from here, a man called Abraham took his son up the mountain to offer him as an expression of his faith. You remember that story? He said, yes. I said, let's not argue about which son right now. I said, but he took his son up that mountain. And as the axe is about to come down, God stops that arm and he says, stop. He said, that's right. I said, what did God say? He just stared at me. I said, God said, stop. I myself will provide. He said, that's right. I said, Sheikh, we're here in Ramallah. Very close to us is a hill. 2,000 years ago, God kept that promise. This time he took his own son up that hill, and this time the axe did not stop. I said, Sheikh Talal, until you and I receive the son God has provided, we'll be offering our own sons and daughters on the battlefields of this world for position and land and power and prestige. He looked at me. There was such a stunned silence in the room. And you know what, folks? I'd never thought of that before. What I'd said just came on the spur of the moment. And I thought, brother, I've really blown it. The Archbishop said, I think it's time for us to go back now. So we started to walk towards the stairways, and I was just in the body or out of the body, I couldn't tell. And the Archbishop put his arm around me and he said, Ravi, that was of God. I said, I sure hope so. We went down and the Sheikh Talal, followed the Archbishop because he was the guest of honor. And so I was hurriedly making my way towards our jeep. And the Sheikh hurriedly put the Archbishop in his and came running towards mine. I said, that's it. I'm going to be there. He's a big, solid guy. He could have had me for lunch that day. He just twirled me around. And I have 2 metal rods in my back. I thought, brother, this is it. He twirled me around, put his hand on my shoulder, stared at me. And I looked back. Then he patted me on both sides of the face, kissed me on both sides of the face. He said, Mr. Zacharias, you're a good man. He said, I hope someday I see you again. And you could just see the eyes welling up with tears. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been a proclaimer of the gospel for 42 years now. I came to know Jesus Christ on a bed of suicide at the age of 17 in Delhi. And the longer I've walked with my Lord, I have got a deeper and deeper conviction that this combination of grace, love, forgiveness, and redemption is the marvelous truth of the gospel that the world so desperately needs. Desperately needs. His description of my condition, his provision for my malady. Thirdly, his strength in my suffering. Remember Annie Johnston Flint, who was orphaned, arthritic, cancerous, blind, incontinent, lay in bed with 8 pillows cushioning the boils on her body for being in bed so long, for so many years. She writes, He giveth more grace when the burdens grow greater. He sendeth more strength when the labors increase. To added affliction he addeth his mercy. To multiplied trials his multiplied peace. When we have exhausted our store of endurance, when our strength has failed ere the day's half done, when we reach the end of our hoarded resources, our Father's full giving has only begun. His love has no limit, his grace has no measure, his power has no boundaries known unto men. For out of his infinite riches in Jesus, he giveth and giveth and giveth again. The Lord who gives succor, sustenance, internal strength, and takes you through the dark nights of the soul. His strength is made perfect in our weakness. No time to expand, but let me just read this for you. hurriedly. What James Stewart said is this: it is a glorious phrase that he led captivity captive. The very triumphs of his foes it means he used for their defeat. He compelled their dark achievements to subserve his ends, not theirs. They nailed him to the tree, not knowing that by that very act they were bringing the world to his feet. They gave him a cross, not guessing that he would make it a throne. They flung him outside the gates to die, not knowing that in that very moment they were lifting up all the gates of the universe to let the King of Glory come in. They thought to root out his doctrines, not understanding that they were implanting imperishably in the hearts of men the very name they intended to destroy. They thought they had God with his back to the wall, pinned and helpless and defeated. They did not know that it was God himself who had tracked them down to that point. He did not conquer in spite of the dark mystery of evil. He conquered through it. The description of your heart, the provision for your malady, the sustenance in your suffering, and lastly, the hope that he gives beyond the grave. When my mother passed away, I couldn't help but think of just one word: she was gone. I was in my 20s when we lost her. Gone, gone. Till my dad asked me to complete the thought, gone where? And on my knees it came so comfortingly: my mother had not just gone, she'd gone home to be with her heavenly Father. She was a late comer to Christ. 3 conversions after the resurrection: Saul of Tarsus to Paul, doubting Thomas to the evangelist to India, James the brother of Jesus. So powerful in their testimonies to the resurrection of Jesus that changed history. Hope. Hope beyond the grave, and hope for now. My time's gone, so let me just close, because I began with "there's nothing like him in history." Malcolm Muggeridge said this, and with this I close. Give me your undivided attention. It'll take me 2 minutes or so to say it. He said, we look back upon history and what do we see? Empires rising and falling, revolutions and counter-revolutions, wealth accumulated and wealth dispersed. Shakespeare has spoken of the rise and fall of great ones that ebb and flow with the moon. I look back upon my own fellow countrymen in England, once upon a time dominating a quarter of the world, most of them convinced, in the words of what is still a popular song, that the God who made them mighty shall make them mightier yet. I've heard a crazed, cracked Austrian announce to the world the establishment of a Reich that would last 1,000 years. I've seen an Italian clown saying he was going to stop and restart the calendar with his own ascension to power. I met a murderous Georgian brigand in the Kremlin, acclaimed by the intellectual elite of the world as a wiser than Solomon, more humane than Marcus Aurelius, more enlightened than Ashoka. I have seen America wealthier, and in terms of military weaponry, had the American people so desired, they could have outdone a Caesar or an Alexander in the range and scale of their conquest, all in one lifetime. All in one lifetime. All gone. Gone with the wind. England, part of a tiny island off the coast of Europe, threatened with dismemberment and even bankruptcy. Hitler and Mussolini dead, remembered only in infamy. Stalin, a forbidden name in the regime he helped found and dominate for some 3 decades. America haunted by the fears of running out of those precious fluids that keep some motorways roaring and the smog settling, with troubled memories of a disastrous campaign in Vietnam and the victory of the Don Quixotes of the media as they charged the windmills of Watergate. All in one lifetime. All in one lifetime. All gone. Behind the debris of these solemn supermen and self-styled imperial diplomatists stands the gigantic figure of one person, because of whom, by whom, in whom, and through whom alone mankind might still have peace, the person of Jesus Christ. The questions that you thought you had the answers to, it didn't. All I'm saying to you is philosophy has a place. It has an argument legitimacy. There's no doubt about it. But philosophy alone will not lead you to God, as you see in the Greek philosophers themselves. They left the answer moot. But then you move to theology. You see holiness, omnipotence, immutability, omniscience, all these great terms. and they are wonderfully instructive terms. We need our theologians. We need our doctrine. We need the correctness. But at the end of all of that study too, you feel something falls short. And that falling short is what sometimes is the gap when you are looking at the sovereignty of God and what He has been sovereign over in your life. For the moment, you seem not to like it at all. See, I don't like what is happening to me, and the sovereignty of God is not a good enough answer at that moment, as Job himself found out and so vociferously argued. Not that it's not important. It just falls short in the realm of human experience and in the longing of the human heart, where you want the sense and the presence of divine. Again, it's valuable. Argument is valuable. Experience is valuable. And all these doctrinal terms are important to unpack and to marvelously understand. They are very, very legitimate in their disciplines. The Apostle Paul understood all of these things. He understood them all very well. He's a brilliant exponent of these ideas. He sat at the feet of Gamaliel. He was a Hebrew by birth. The Hebrews gave to us our moral categories. He studied in a Greek city. The Greeks gave to us our philosophical categories. He was a citizen of Rome. Rome gave to us our legal categories. He understood these things, understood them well. And then on that divine encounter, on that road to Damascus, where he finally met the risen Christ, he writes in 2 Corinthians 4:6, to the Hebrews, for whom the quintessential metaphor was light, to the Greeks, for whom the quintessential essential expression was in knowledge, to the Romans it was glory. You've got the light, the knowledge, and the glory in three great cultures. He writes to the church at Corinth, God, who caused the light to shine out of darkness, has caused His light to shine in our hearts, to give to us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ Jesus our Lord. What a beautiful verse. What a beautiful verse to summarize in just a few words the converging beams of knowledge on a face. It's a marvelous thing to ponder. See, unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given. The son wasn't born. The son eternally existed. The child was born. The son was given. How meticulously and carefully they chose their words. Now I want you to look at that face with me for a few moments. Because this very face is set with grim determination to a hill called Calvary. And in John 17, you hear him praying for his disciples before he leaves. And the struggle has begun, the struggle of the flesh in itself, because the very idea of the cross, excruciatus, literally comes out of the cross, how painful it was. And for him, the very Son of God, all that was lying ahead of him, you and I could probably never understand. But 3 times in his prayer, he says this, Holy Father, Holy Father, Holy Father. You know, I didn't have a close relationship with my dad, although I had a great admiration for him, but he was a man plagued with a violent temper. When he lost his temper and when he lost sober reasoning, what used to break out in the house was indescribable. I've told it in my book, Walking from East to West, and before I sent it to print, I only sent it after they passed away, and I sent it to my brothers and sisters. So what do you think? Is it okay? And one of them wrote back and said, Rav, if anything, you've gone very kindly on this, you've held back. But you know, one of the reasons I could hold back too was because it's not the way the story ended. My mom died when she was 57. My dad died 5 years after that, so we lost them both very early in life. But my dad came to know Christ just a few years before he passed away, in one of the most dramatic conversions I've ever seen. He lived in Toronto. My brothers and sisters are all still in Toronto. My parents are buried there. And I lived in Niagara Falls, Ontario at that time. And I get this telephone call, "Son, would you drive me to the hospital? I'm doing elective bypass." I said, "Dad, really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I think I need to." It was in the early days of bypass. They had not yet brought it to the kind of excellence they have now. He was quite overweight and not to have really gone in then, but that's all past now. So I drive the 75 miles, I pick him up, and I take him in. He says, "I wanted to talk to you alone. I want to have this time with you alone." He was very close to my older brother, and he lived in Toronto, and he phones me. So I knew things were going to be made right that day. And in our culture, for a father to have said the things he said to me was almost unthinkable, really. Fathers never want to look weak in front of their kids. In the East, they're always the big person on campus. And when I finished and sent him on, little knowing that I was not going to see him alive again, I realized what I'd missed all those years. What a description to give to us of God. He is our Holy Father. You need Him. I need Him. He exemplifies that which the human heart craves for. That strong arm that is strong not only in strength, but in the ultimate beauty of love. I have a letter that I want to read for you. This letter was written in 1989. It was written by a 12-year-old, a young boy by the name of McKittrick. His name is McKittrick Simmons. He's a grown man now and is a businessman in Atlanta. But in 1989, his father was a successful businessman at the age of 41, had bought a property in Highlands, North Carolina. Any one of you have been there know it's beautiful, beautiful terrain out there, just lovely and spectacular to see. So he had, Greg Simmons had five children. The youngest was just a babe in arms, and the one above her, I think, was about 1, if I'm not mistaken, but McKittrick was 12. So Greg phones a friend of his and asks a friend to bring his son, and Greg takes his 4 kids. So there's Greg and his friend with his son and 4 of his children. And so the 7 of them go, and they are visiting Highlands. And at one point, the son, McKittrick, 12, looks at his dad and says, "Dad, can we go up to the waterfall too?" And he says, "I've never walked up that close, son. Why don't you come along?" So they walk up. At a certain point, he puts his arm out and tells all of the rest of them to stay. He would check out the terrain. And he takes one hesitant foot at a time, took one too many, and came cartwheeling down a 1/4 of a mile to his death. His wife, Christy, at home with a baby. And the rest of them watched this happening. I happened to be speaking in Chattanooga sometime later, and Greg, who had passed away, his parents, I was staying in their home, and they brought me this letter. And I remember reading it then, and I said, "I can't believe this has been written by a 12-year-old, and the parents are, of course, crying their heart out there. I said, "Do I have the permission to use this?" He said, "Yes." Contacted Christy. I know Christy will have their permission. Here's what he writes to Mrs. Wheeland, the Wheeland family, prominent builders in Atlanta to this very day. "Dear Miss Wheeland, you don't know how much your family helped produce my father. He admired your husband and you a lot. He would talk about how good your faith was with God. He tried to be as generous as you all have been to the church and many other good things. Since his death, true friends were revealed. Your family is at the top of our list. You're a great source of energy for my mother and I. My daddy loved you very much and was always trying to be like you. Daddy was like one of the 3 men in the Bible who were given the talents by Jesus. One went out and invested them and multiplied them. One took some stock that failed and came out with nothing. The last one buried them and did nothing with them. All 3 returned in a few days, and the Lord was pleased with the 2 who had tried to multiply them. But with the 3rd who came back with the same amount, the Lord was disappointed because he didn't try. My father multiplied and lost many things, but he's always trying to please the Lord. He got a lot of that from your family, Miss Whelan. My daddy was a risk taker, and that's just the way he was. Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning is God," and that was the most important thing to my father. In the beginning of my dad's life, he was something special and a risk taker. That's why he's so brilliant and successful. No one will understand how or why my daddy fell into the waterfall. Please do yourself a favor and don't try to figure it out. My dad died for his children. He was making sure it was safe for us to come up. You may hear different things, but only 6 people saw it, only 3 understand or understood what really happened that day. I'm one of those. My mom has lost her treasure chest, her husband. Most of the others have lost Greg. You've lost a best friend. My grandparents have lost their son. Forrest, John, and Barbara have lost their brother. But Ms. Whelan, it is different for me, totally different for me. He was my best friend and my idol. But when I got my last glimpse of him falling down the falls, I lost my most prized man on earth. He was my father. He was my one and only dad. I had a dream of him 3 nights ago, but it wasn't a dream. My daddy is all right. He told me himself, thank you for being a true friend. I love you a lot. McKittrick Simmons. 12. Imagine a world without a creator. Imagine that. The darkness, the destitute reality. No, you and I are the creation of a merciful, loving, heavenly Father. Who are you, God? You are my holy Father. That's who He is. But secondly, the question goes, did you not deliver us before? You know how important now experience becomes in knowing the presence of God? The revelation of truth comes from His Word. In the beginning, God. But in that promise of all of the theory, He gives us the promise of a relationship. I don't think you will ever hear any other religion ever talk about a relationship with God. None. You won't. The Muslim will never talk about a relationship with God. He'll consider that concept blasphemous. Blasphemous in relation to God, who is so distinctly the other. Pantheism, you ultimately are divine yourself through your multiple rebirths in life. And yet here we understand that He calls us to this relationship, invites us to trust in Him and know Him. That's why Paul, who knew Christ chronologically in reverse order, all of the others knew Him from His birth, life, death, and resurrection. He encountered Christ on the resurrection first. That's why He said, that I may know Him, the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of His suffering, being made conformable unto His death. He was moving from the destination point to the origin point. He wanted to cover the gamut, understanding who this Jesus really was, even in His suffering, not just the triumphal resurrection. I came here from Connecticut, where I was speaking at Connecticut Christian University for 2 days, and the only reason I was there, and I told them that, I said, you know, it's busy for me to travel. I said, but I'm here for one reason. The president's assistant is a woman called Wendy. I've known Wendy from when she was a baby in arms, and the reason I knew her is her father who led me to Christ. She wasn't even born when he led me to Christ. Her father, Fred David, who used to live not far from here, passed away last April. And he came into my hospital room when I was 17 in Delhi and brought a Bible to me. And I couldn't hold the Bible. My body was dehydrated with the poison I'd taken. My mother's English was rather struggling in itself. And yet here in the King James, she's going to have to read to me. He was not allowed to stay because I was in very critical condition. But he opens it to John chapter 14 and tells her where to read it for me. And he had to leave. He passed away last year. A few days before he passed away, he spoke to me on the phone. And he said, Ravi, I often think that the only reason I came into this world was to walk into your hospital room and give you a Bible. I said, no, Fred, you did a lot more than that. He said, no, man, that's the way I think. I said, Fred, you did a lot more than that. So this 1-year anniversary of his death, Cincinnati Christian University wanted to know if I'd come and speak in memory or in honor of that life. You see, I'd never opened the Bible. I didn't even have one. My ancestors came from the highest caste of the Hindu priesthood, and there was a conversion that took place somewhere, and then it ultimately became nominal. But a man prompted by God, who comes into my hospital room and gives me that Bible, and 5 days later I walk out of there a totally different man. That's what my dad said to me. What happened to you had to take the supernatural. He said, I could never change you. I could never change you. And then I began to study, and then I began to pursue, understand why all this is true. And Fred was always there on the sidelines cheering me on. Do you know, he never even went to college. I don't even think he finished high school. And yet, he was prompted by God. Do you know him? Do you know you've met him and encountered him? Did you not? So that you have that moment that you came to know him. I know the moment I looked at my wife and said to her, I love you. Will you marry me? Why? It's that ultimate commitment of consummate love. I remember the moment my little ones came into this world and I held them for the first time. I remember the moment I preached my first sermon. I remember the moment I got off a plane in Toronto, Canada for the first time in the West and saying, wow, we're all the billion people. Remember all these things. How much more important to know the moment where you met the living Christ. When that happens to you, you will know that divine encounter has taken place. You're in his hands. Are you not? Did you not? Which brings me to the last, will you not? You know, I said it in the last service. I'm not 100% sure if any one of you has a way to research this. I think there's the middle verse in the Old Testament, not sure. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of this vast army, for the battle is not yours, but God's. What a reassurance to Jehoshaphat. This is not your war, it's mine. You know, I look at the way our country is spiraling down into the vortex of moral suicide. I have never recalled such disastrous decisions being made in such a rapid sequence, redefining everything, all with a pomposity that we've arrived. And I lose heart, and then you say, you know, maybe we need somebody else up in this place, somebody else out there. Yeah, I think we can make the right decisions and wiser decisions, but ultimately it's not politics that's going to help us. No country in the world is happy politically today. No countries in the world. Everybody wants a change. There's only one hope. That hope is in the living God. Billy Graham once was telling us around a table, he said, I'll never forget the day Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of Germany, looked me in the eye after he'd walked up to the window and looked at the ruins of the city, and he came back and he said, Mr. Graham, do you believe Jesus Christ really rose again from the dead? Billy shocked and said, Mr. Adenauer, if I didn't believe in that, I would have no gospel to preach. And he said, Konrad Adenauer said to him this, outside of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, I know of no other hope for mankind. Outside of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, I know of no other hope for mankind. The ramification of that statement is immense, and I don't want to get sidetracked here. Justice, morality, all these other things get defined. But I just want to say this to you. I don't know what you may be going through right now. In an audience like this, some of you have to be hurting very deeply. Some of you may be struggling financially and you don't know how you're going to cope. Some of you hurting physically. Some of you struggling emotionally. Some of your families are falling apart. Some of you hurting for your children, your grandchildren. I see it, I hear it all the time. We've been through the valley too, so many times, you know. And you walk there and you realize, how do you make it without God? Can't do it. Trust Him. Walk with Him. As the Holy Father prayer, he knew that without his Father's will, he would never have endured it and never gone towards it. So I just want to say to you, if you're hurting today and you're struggling, get some moments alone with God and ask Him to walk with you through that. Without Him, you will never be able to make it. You will never be able to make it. It will make you cynical, if not apathetic. You see, in 1939, everything about the world was going to be redefined. The war was looming, where tens of thousands were going to be decimated. King George VI, with his stuttering malady, went to the microphone. because he knew somebody had to bring hope to this world. He didn't know at that time during his speech that he himself had cancer within his body. It became one of the most historic speeches that you can go into almost any bookstore in England and ask for King George VI's speech in 39. Because in them were these famous words, "I said to the man at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may walk safely into the unknown. And he said to me, go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. It shall be to you better than the light and safer than the known." He said to the man at the gate of the ear, give me a light that I may walk safely into the unknown. He said to me, go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. It shall be to you better than the light and safer than the known. How do you put your hand into the hand of God? This is it. Take it, read it, imbibe it, and you'll be surprised how he brings those words back to you just when you need them the most. Thy word is truth. But there is an extension of that. I believe the extension is in fellowship. Believers such as you are here. How you reach out across the aisle and hold the hand of a fellow believer who will represent the touch of God and the hope of God as you stand together in community. If there's one prayer for my life in these days, my team hears me say this, the front end of the problem is evangelism. The back end of the problem is where do you send them when they come to know Christ? Churches like yours are rare. We need the fellowship. We need the community. We need the building together of God's people. Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. It shall be to you better than the light and safer than the known. It's a long story, and I don't have time to go into it. I will just tell you this. From 1985 to 2012, I lived in pain every day because of my back. Cried out to him every day. May 29, 2012, a friend of mine comes from Singapore. I don't have time to go into He just said to me, God had spoken to him the previous day, and he